Fear in High Heels. I was once in love with a gifted young man, somebody who I thought was a far more talented writer than me, who decided in his 20s that he would not bother trying to be a writer after all, because the work never came out on the page quite as exquisitely as it lived in his head. He found it all too frustrating. He didn't want to sully the dazzling ideal that existed in his mind by putting a clumsy rendition of it down on paper. While I beavered away at my awkward, disappointing short stories, this brilliant young man refused to write a word. He even tried to make me feel ashamed that I was attempting to write. Did the dreadful results not pain and offend me? Who possessed a more pristine sense of artistic discernment was the implication. Exposure to imperfections, even his own, injured his soul. He felt there was nobility in his choice never to write a book if it could not be a great book. He said, I would rather be a beautiful failure than a deficient success. Hell, I wouldn't. The image of the tragic artist who lays down his tools rather than fall short of his impeccable ideals holds no romance for me. I don't see this path as heroic. I think it's far more honorable to stay in the game, even if you're objectively failing at the game, than to excuse yourself from participation because of your delicate sensibilities. But in order to stay in the game, you must let go of your fantasy of perfection. So, let's talk for a moment about perfection. The great American novelist Robert Stone once joked that he possessed the two worst qualities imaginable in a writer. He was lazy and he was a perfectionist. Indeed, those are the essential ingredients for torpor and misery right there. If you want to live a contented creative life, you do not want to cultivate either one of those traits, trust me. What you want is to cultivate quite the opposite. You must learn how to become a deeply disciplined half ass. It starts by forgetting about perfection. We don't have time for perfect. In any event, perfection is unachievable. It's a myth and a trap and hamster wheel that will run you to your death. The writer Rebecca Solnit put it well. So many of us believe in perfection, which ruins everything else, because the perfect is not only the enemy of the good, it's also the enemy of the realistic, the possible, and the fun. Perfectionism stops people from completing their work, yes, but even worse, it often stops people from beginning their work. Perfectionists often decide in advance that the end product is never going to be satisfactory, so they don't even bother trying to be creative in the first place. The most evil trick about perfectionism, though, is that it disguises itself as a virtue. In job interviews, for instance, people will sometimes advertise their perfectionism as if it's their greatest selling point, taking pride in the very thing that is holding them back from enjoying their fullest possible engagement with creative living. They wear their perfectionism like a badge of honor, as if it signals high tastes and exquisite standards. But I see it differently. I think perfectionism is just a high end haute couture version of fear. I think perfectionism is just fear in fancy shoes and a mink coat, pretending to be elegant when actually it's just terrified. Because underneath that shiny veneer, perfectionism is nothing more than a deep existential angst that says again and again, I am not good enough and I will never be good enough. Perfectionism is a particularly evil lure for women who, I believe, hold themselves to an even higher standard of performance than do men. There are many reasons why women's voices and visions are not more widely represented today in creative fields. Some of that exclusion is due to regular old misogyny, but it's also true that, all too often, women are the ones holding themselves back from participating in the first place, holding back their ideas, holding back their contributions, holding back their leadership and their talents. Too many women still seem to believe that they are not allowed to put themselves forward at all until both they and their work are perfect and beyond criticism. Meanwhile, putting forth work that is far from perfect rarely stops men from participating in the global cultural conversation. Just saying. And I don't say this as a criticism of men, by the way. I like that feature in men, their absurd overconfidence, the way that they will casually decide, well, I'm 41% qualified for this task, so give me the job. Yes, sometimes the results are ridiculous and disastrous, but sometimes, strangely enough, it works. A man who seems not ready for the task, not good enough for the task, somehow grows immediately into his potential through the wild leap of faith itself. I only wish more women would risk these same kinds of wild leaps. But I've watched too many women do the opposite. I've watched far too many brilliant and gifted female creators say, I am 99.8% qualified for this task, but until I master that last smidgen of ability, I will hold myself back just to be on the safe side. Now, I cannot imagine where women ever got the idea that they must be perfect in order to be loved or successful. Just kidding. I can totally imagine. We got it from every single message society has ever sent us. Thanks, all of human history. But we women must break this habit in ourselves, and we are the only ones who can break it. We must understand that the drive for perfectionism is a corrosive waste of time because nothing is ever beyond criticism. No matter how many hours you spend attempting to render something flawless, somebody will always be able to find fault with it. There are people out there who still consider Beethoven's symphonies a little bit too, you know, loud. At some point, you really just have to finish your work and release it as is, if only so that you can go on to make other things with a glad and determined heart, which is the entire point, or should be.